Whoa, that was quick. We're live. We'll count up here. Little trim for Cecil. Thank you, everybody. Folks that may be showing up a little bit later, but we'll be back at the regular time next week. Took a little trip, played some disc golf. Gene, Matt, either you guys ever disc golf?
There's one in a park right where I usually go all the time. It's beautiful. I've been wanting to do it, but something got in the way this winter, so they have to go check it out a little bit.
I am chuckling because not only have I played disc golf, but I was a caddy for a very good friend of mine was a professional disc golfer in one of the very first tournaments. I think I was the first and maybe only disc golf caddy.
Did you help him pick lines and strategies?
No.
Really
no,
fun.
It was I have no idea why he even allowed me to do it or why we were even talking about it or how it happened. But by the final round in which he was one of the top 3 people, everyone had a caddy. So I was a pioneer. I've never been back since to anything such thing. So I don't know if that's you disc golfers out there. If there's such a thing as caddies in disc golf tournaments, I was the first one. I don't know if that's something that I ought to be proud of or not, but it's the truth.
Squirrel whisperer, disc golf caddy.
Field goal kicking coach.
Add that to the annals of the Audible ridiculousness.
That's right. The annals of Audible ridiculousness will be added to tonight. Everybody, thank you. It is Dr. Jene Bramel, Matt Waldman, and Sigmund Bloom here a little bit later on a Thursday night. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And just to get back in the swing of things, we'll jump right in, Dr. Jene. And we talked about some injury news. Of course, folks, check out, again, the latest injury rounds to keep you updated. Let's talk about a new one. Darrell Henderson and his off-season ankle surgery, and he actually has been around the facility because he's rehabbing it. But Gene, we're talking 6 months later, season-ending ankle injury, surgery. This isn't like the Thomas Rawls situation where he didn't have surgery and then it ended up being an issue, but still ankle surgery isn't the greatest thing for a running back. Anything particular to be worried about here?
The lack of knowns would make me a little bit nervous here. We've seen ankle injuries players recover relatively easily from. AJ Green didn't do so well last year. Cam Newton in the past hasn't done so well. Without knowing the specifics of the injury, I think there's plenty of room to be nervous because we're 4 to 6 months into his rehab and maybe not at a point where if training camp were to start today, he would have been cleared to play. And a lot of players in the offseason are going to miss some offseason workouts and maybe even June mini camps. And that sounds like that would have been part of the plan with Henderson. But he's a player, given what happened last year when he really didn't, catch fire in that backfield with Gurley, with the Rams, looking for a plan around Gurley. You'd like to see him come into camp healthy so that he can establish himself as an option for the coaches and somebody that's trustworthy. And that's not always as important at the running back position at some other positions because there's so much turnover and injury and a player can catch fire quickly, but a player that's not established himself, a player that needs to make some headway on a roster to establish himself for the longer term, needs to at some point prove to the team that he's durable and capable of handling whatever role in the backfield that they'd like him to have. So this is going to be one of many players. Again, this year is going to be a little bit unusual with coronavirus. This is going to be one of many players that the very beginning of training camp and whether or not he gets placed on the PUP list and how long he may or may not stay there is going to be the primary factor that we need to be looking at as we get into August.
So you mentioned AJ Green. So what are your thoughts on him and his progress moving forward?
I think last year, it was evident fairly early on that he wasn't going to be ready for the regular season. It became evident that his rehab wasn't going as well as maybe he hoped it would. It became evident that he didn't want to return to a team that wasn't going anywhere and risk any issues. It also seems evident this offseason that his rehab is he is reportedly doing everything he would ordinarily be able to do and is fully recovered. Without knowing the specifics of the surgery, I think we could probably speculate that, this was another one of those 4 to 6, probably even month procedures that we were told he could return in 12 weeks from that just never panned out that way. So he's another player that it would have been great to have OTAs this year to see how much he was cleared to do and whether or not he had any issues. He's a player that wants to play. He's a player that wants to be out on the field when he can. He participated in OTAs last year. without any concern. So that would have been a great data point to have, but we don't have it. So, every expectation for Green at this point should be that he is ready to participate in the first practice that the Bengals have, whenever that may be. And if he's not, then the flags are absolutely as red as they can be for his career, much less his season. But everything that's been suggested this offseason from Green to Zach Taylor has been suggesting that he's going to be ready to go this year.
Just as a quick follow-up before I give you the next question, Gene, and I know you're not doing any drafts yet, or if you were, I don't want to ask you to pin down a specific round for AJ Green, okay? But, last year, what was it, 5th, 6th round, where you could get him hurt, and you already knew he was hurt. He's around in the 5th or 6th round these days. Would that make you feel still tentative, or would you say, hey, at that price, yeah, go for it?
I don't know that I know enough about the wide receiver tiers to know what's in that similar round to decide where the comfort level is. I tend to subscribe to the feeling that I'm looking for upside with almost every pick. So in that area, if there's not a lot of floor players that have some upside, then I don't see any reason not to take a shot on AJ Green. You are not going to win or lose your league with your 6th round pick. I suppose you could win it if you take Lamar Jackson there last year, for example. But I don't think you're losing anything necessarily. And I haven't heard anything through the offseason notes that says you should avoid him altogether, unless your overriding philosophy is I'm not taking a chance on an oft-injured player unless and until I see that he's able to do anything on the field. So I think that's, in that situation, it'd probably be an all or none. If that is the area where you would consider a player like AJ Green with a hopefully improved offensive line, with a hopefully improved quarterback, albeit one who may not have a chance to build up much rapport with his receivers and Joe Burrow, then I think there's every reason to consider him in that area. If you would not consider him in that area, knowing that that's probably where maybe his median projection would be, then maybe you take him off your board altogether because you're just not willing to consider a player coming off an ankle injury who's not been able to be productive in a long, long time. Or, you redline him to a point where, I'm just not going to take him until XYZ happens, knowing that at that point, somebody's going to take him before then. So you just decide I think, he's either on your board right now or he's not.
Yeah, 6th round, and just so you know, to round out this little right turn, the 3 receivers right before him in ADP right now are Terry McLaurin. That one might be tough. Devontae Parker.
Yeah, I don't know how you wouldn't take McLaurin over him.
And actually, even Devontae Parker. But these guys are both underrated. Show you, this is how deep wide receiver is. Debo Samuel, right after him, Jarvis Landry, Michael Gallup, Tyler Boyd.
Yeah, I think McLaurin, I wouldn't have any issue
he should
taking him ahead of time. But
bold letters.
Yeah, Devontae Parker, there's a lot of issues surrounding. That's not a simple question there. So McLaurin, I would not be taking AJ Green over McLaurin, but the other two.
But he shouldn't be in the 6th round anyway. Well, McLaurin should be going in the 4th or 5th round. So that's, and I forget who it was. I think it was, I don't remember who it was in the community that said, at this point, ADP still has a lot of imperfections in it, a lot of inefficiency by the crowd that you can exploit that you won't be able to in August. And we'll see if AJ Green is part of that. Okay. The Saline 786 brings up in the chat room, Gene, NFL contemplating 2 preseason games. He asked how it would affect rookie quarterbacks, and we can talk about that. And Matt, you can talk about that too, because that affects like Devontae Parker, for instance. But Gene, I want to ask you, if we do get a 2-game preseason, does that, because you talk about knowns and unknowns with someone like Darrell Henderson, and there's a lot of players with offseason surgery, like you said, no OTAs, no mini camps to get data points on them. Will you become generally more risk averse if we have that shorter ramp up time?
No, I feel like over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been paying more attention to how much practice participation there is, whether or not a injured player, a recovering player, a newly injured player is participating in consecutive practices and walkthroughs. I don't know that the preseason has made much difference at all, honestly. Recently, I've barely paid attention to games. Many players who have any sort of injury at all, especially if they're expected to be a part of the roster and a key part as far as the snap count goes, haven't been participating at all. Maybe not even until the last, and maybe just to get them a series, just to get some, game speed situation. Does it affect quarterbacks? Probably, but I think the lack of off-season training activities, the lack of meeting time in person, the lack of physical reps, and the lack of mini camps, and trying to figure out a way to get everybody in training camp at the same time in a reasonable time frame is going to be much more detrimental to the younger teams and the teams that are changing schemes or what have you than just missing a couple of preseason games.
I think it's a great question and a great subject. And speaking of rookies, I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on a guy like Laviska Shenault's track record in terms of the injuries he's had for the past year, the past calendar year. You know, he had the toe surgery, he had a shoulder surgery, then he ran the 40 and at the combine, and then promptly had abdominal surgery. A lot of people seem scared off by him. I'm revamping rankings or revamping my criteria for the rookie scouting portfolio, which I do seems to be every 3 to 4 or 5 years. And I was going back and rescoring the 2020 draft class with my new criteria. And there were 2 players that really jumped out that actually had significant gains. Everyone else was kind of small or pretty much the same, but one of those was Laviska Shenault, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on the whole injury thing, because that seems to scare everybody off of him.
Yeah, I think that the most recent injury is the core abdominal muscle repair that he had, and that's something that was taken care of relatively early as far as things go in the off season. Enough time. Not that it was early. March is not necessarily early for a professional football offseason, but in enough time so that kind of worst case scenario 6 to 8 week recovery time frame. Usually we'll see 4 to 6 weeks quoted, and we've had lots of players kind of return effective in that time frame. So 2 months after March would be the end of May at worst case scenario. So you would really expect him to be ready to go in for training camp at the end of July, early August without any difficulty. Without knowing a ton of specifics about the toe, shoulders tend not to worry me unless it's say an Anthony Miller situation where there's multiple labral issues, and the first surgery didn't significantly reduce his risk of issue, and that's not really something that's been reported to be the case with Shenault. So I'm not too worried about the core abdominal muscle surgery. There's a number of players that chose to do that between February and April this year when rehab didn't work out as expected. Some of that probably got delayed a little bit, or maybe players were not considering surgery and then had a sense that elective surgeries might be postponed as we got toward the middle of March and beyond with the COVID epidemic. And maybe that's part of what happened there, or some of these, Brandon Ayuk is in the same situation where something was probably recommended to him at the combine saying that you probably need to get this done, pro day or otherwise. So I don't have too much concern about him. Again, knowing what we know about the NFL offseason, you can escalate that with college issues as far as trying to get information about what procedures were done and what rehab was done and whether or not recoveries went as smoothly as possible. And this year with COVID, we didn't really get a lot of follow-up from the combine about injured college players. So I haven't heard anything concerning in the last month or so after the post-draft interviews and otherwise. And, again, it's just going to be a huge list of players that we're going to want to know exactly how teams decide to work with them as training camp opens.
I got to go back. And I always talk about this. It's one of the things that makes Matt Waldman the best to get your RSP, self-scouting, revamping rankings. What I love about this, Matt, is you're already retroactively applying them. Can you give us just like a little hint or insight into some of the things that you adjusted and why?
Well, I mean, if you've been watching the Audible for the past year and a half, then you look behind me on this board and you'd see like a board that was filled with stuff. And now you notice that it's almost pretty empty at this stage.
Is that like your head right now? I mean, not that your head's empty, but you know what I mean? You don't have a bunch of threads going all at once.
Pretty much, yeah. So I'm sleeping a lot now, but I'm in hibernation. But no, actually, I took all of that and just, applied that to how I grade wide receivers. And so a lot of it's similar things that I looked at in the past, but maybe a new way of defining it or maybe breaking it down in greater detail. So the RSP now has like well over 100 criteria points that I look for at wide receiver alone. When I do a checklist, it's broken down that much. And so what I did is I've done that for tight end as well, a little bit for running back, not a lot of changes for that one. Some changes for quarterback. And what I did was, really just looked at for wide receiver, for instance, it was just, more types of ways that they separate, and what those technique things are, more ways that they set up routes, the different types of ways they use leverage to win, different types of techniques that I've always kind of looked at, but for catching the football, but maybe defining them a little bit differently and separating them differently, weighting everything a little bit differently. I used to, the biggest thing I've done that's kind of caused the change is that when I grade the players, with the depth of talent that I use for rankings, it used to be a little bit more weighted towards route running and separation over catching the football. And then I probably gave a little bit more value to blocking, not a lot, but a little more to blocking and ball carrying than I probably needed to. So I took a little bit off of that because it was already not a lot. I took a little bit away from route running and added more to pass catching and to power and to athletic traits, because I tend to be in the minority where I tended to focus a little bit more on technical skills. But I decided that I was a little bit too weighted towards that in a way where I feel like that I wanted to give just a touch where the technical skills were about even with the athletic skills in my evaluation. And as I've started to look at the grades retroactively based on that new system, and it's still a bit of a projection because I'd have to go back and rewatch them in a way. Some of the athletes get a little bit of a bigger bump. Some of the guys who don't have a lot of athletic ability, but not a lot of but have a lot of technical ability, they dipped a little bit. And that's kind of how I wanted it. Like to me, a guy like Van Jefferson should be a little bit lower on my board than I feel like I had him. Not that I had him as high as other people, but he's an example. Whereas a guy like Donovan Peoples-Jones, I felt like deserved to be a little bit higher on my board, or even a lot higher on my board, based on the potential of what he can provide, than maybe I did in the past.
This is awesome. What you need to produce, Matt, is the Waldman RSP app where people can do their own scouting philosophy, and then it plugs in your raw numbers and then ranks them, for you based on what you weight. Anyway, it's fun, man. Okay, Dr. Gene. Jim Harbaugh. I'm sorry, not Jim Harbaugh. My brain's been crossing up. John Harbaugh.
The
John
real Harbaugh.
Yeah. The saying, this is my whole point, actually. So by accidentally bringing up Jim Harbaugh, we can frame John Harbaugh as a very sane, level-headed person, at least, as NFL head coaches goes. However, and I'm assuming you're at least, vaguely familiar with the guidelines the NFL sent out about COVID. He said, I've seen all the memos on that. To be quite honest with you, it's impossible what they're asking us to do, humanly impossible. So we're going to do everything we can do. We're going to space. We're going to have masks. But it's a communication sport. We have to be able to communicate with each other in person. We have to practice. I'm pretty sure the huddle's not going to be 6 feet spaced. Our guy's going to shower one at a time all day. Our guy's going to lift weights one at a time all day. These are things the league and the Players Association need to get a handle on and needs to get agreed with some common sense so we can operate in a 13-hour day in training camp that they're giving us and get our work done. That's the one thing you can tell by my voice. See, I'm not simulating it well. I'm sure I should be more frustrated. I'm a little frustrated with what I'm hearing here, and I think they need to get that pinned down a little better. I think good people, smart people are involved in this, but the way I'm reading these memos right now, you throw up your hands and you go, what the heck? There's no way this can be right. Thoughts?
Yeah. I think he's sharing everyone's frustration with the situation in which we're now in, is that there are no easy solutions. There is no simple way to avoid exposure unless you are limiting exposure. And right? In a contact sport, you can say, we're going to hold our meetings outside where the chairs are 6 to 10 feet apart. We can put signs on the floor that say this hallway you go this way, this hallway you go that way. We can, all these things, but at some point, yes, you're going to have to be allowed to practice. And at some point, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, there are going to be players, teams, position groups that are affected by COVID. And yes, there's tons of smart people, but smart people are, if you have players sweating and breathing and hitting each other, um, there's risk there. So I think what the NFL is likely trying to do is minimize that risk of exposure and illness as long as possible, knowing that on game days, the risk is going to go through the roof if there are players who are infected. That's going to be just a fact of playing games, unfortunately, and a fact of doing conditioning and practices and team drills and things like that. It is what it is. Now, they're going to try to mitigate those things by testing folks regularly and hoping that players and coaches and staff members and everybody attached to the team and otherwise takes care of themselves as well as they possibly can away from the facility, so that if they're minimizing their risk away from the facility, hopefully you don't bring coronavirus into the facility. But it's going to happen. And I can understand the frustration. We did a virtual draft. OTAs were canceled. Mini camps were canceled. Now it looks very unlikely that, with only a few exceptions, players are not going to be back in the building before June 26th, which is the kind of the shutdown for the summer until training camp happens, which means training camp is going to be the first time where players are in there. And teams have been told this week, you have essentially 4 weeks to figure out how to do this, to get yourselves and your facilities certified so that we can open up. And all 32 teams have to have done this. Otherwise, players are not going to be allowed back. It's been, in that regard, a meritocracy, in that the NFL have told teams, if one team can't make this happen, none of the teams come back, because we're not going to let some teams be ahead of others because of states doing differently, one state doing something differently than the other, one community doing something different than the other. One team is not going to be allowed to do things that other teams are not able to do. So, and essentially the head of internal medicine for the NFL has told teams, here's what you have to do and figure it out. I did a lot of creative Googling over the last couple of days. I saw the cover sheet of the memo, and I've seen some of the physical distancing requirements and some bits and pieces of things that have been written by the AP and others, but I've not been able to find the full 4-page list of issues. And I think it's all been summarized enough to know that you can see how a team would see that these things are onerous. I mean, they're going to have to redo their locker rooms. They're going to have to redo their meeting rooms. It's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, as he says, humanly impossible, to run an 11-on-11 team drill in the way you normally would in training camp with the current restrictions and recommendations where they are. So this is, it is a new world in lots of different ways. And that is definitely going to extend to how the NFL handles training camp. And, like I said, as we said a couple of weeks ago, get ready. We are not going to make it through the season with 0 coronavirus cases in the NFL. You want to talk about humanly impossible. I would say that's humanly impossible.
The way that teams have money, so much money, and throw money at things, that they would all have like a coronavirus consultant or something that would just say, like you said, like have the meetings outside, or just they're willing to make these kinds of measures to secretly have their.
I think it's the practice. I think they know that this is, you can't play football without lining up and hitting somebody and breathing and sweating all over.
Yeah.
And sweat probably isn't gonna, sweat's not the issue, but it's the breathing, it's all that sort of stuff. It's 90 players in a locker room on July 27th, plus everybody that goes along with that. I think his frustration is, how are we going to prepare for a 17-week regular season and everything that goes along with pushing for a playoff berth and championship run and that sort of stuff with way this is, because it's new. Again, it's new. We've never done this before. Now, yes, we have gradually over the past decade decreased the number of full contact practices, and we've decreased the number of, chances for injury and that sort of stuff. But we have never separated ourselves in this regard, where we've not been able to have our teams here for rehab purposes. We've not had our players here for installation purposes. We've not had our teams here for getting to know each other purposes. And we've certainly never had teams here for not being able to practice as we need to. And now it's looking like, the end of July is going to be the first chance that teams are going to be able to get together, and there's still going to be some pretty onerous restrictions on them to be able to do that. But this is unfortunately likely what's necessary, even best case scenario, to be able to avoid enough cases where we have some chance at a full 17-week plus playoff regular season without major competitive balance issues, because teams have significant coronavirus outbreaks.
So Bloom, on the note of consultants,
yeah,
I would like to nominate my governor to be the consultant for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah. What is it? Everything is open in Georgia except voting booths. Oh,
Yeah, pretty much. So speaking of weird situations, the fifth metatarsal fixation that I keep seeing, like with rookie receivers, Brian Edwards, Van Jefferson are two of them. Paris Campbell was a second-year guy. Where's the fifth metatarsal again? And is this something that we should be worried about to the level that, say, like kind of like the Liz Frank that Marquise Brown had, where he didn't completely get to play to the level that he wanted to?
Yeah, I think, well, the Marquise Brown issue is a little bit different in that his surgery was so close to the regular season that even a best case scenario just wasn't going to be able. And then, he had a screw removed this offseason because it was limiting what he was able to do. He was having some pain and discomfort even after the injury had kind of healed. So the fifth metatarsal is the bone behind your pinky toe. That's the big bone in your foot. And where it's broken is sort of towards the back of that area, and it's an area where the blood supply isn't great. So the surgical procedures have improved over time, where we've learned that a couple of things can improve the chances of success. One of them is inserting a little bit larger screw. One of them is sometimes using some bone graft material to assist with the healing. And then, all of the usual minimally invasive surgeries and smart rehab protocols and what have you. And we've seen many players, wide receivers in particular, who have the injury, have the surgery, and then need a revision procedure at some point. So the first procedure tends to stabilize the bone, but there are issues with the screw, or there's some healing issues, and they end up where the healing process starts, but then there's something else that needs to happen later. And I think over the years we've seen Dr. Anderson and others try to, with the initial surgery, avoid some of those issues by without needing to do revisions, but there have been many, many players that have required revisions. A little bit less in the last couple of years, and we'll see how some of those protocols persist. But as I've said, when these things happen in the off season, or when the revision procedure happens in the off season, and you get a full 12 to 16 weeks to allow for healing and recovery and rehab and reconditioning, those players tend to do much better. But whenever you see a player where this injury happens at some point from training camp and beyond, it becomes exceedingly difficult for them to recover in time to be effective during the regular season. But we've also seen, you name it, people probably forget Julio Jones, Emmanuel Sanders, and the list just so many of them is not even coming to mind. But those are the two that always come to mind. The players you probably don't realize have had more than one Jones fracture surgery some years ago, and you don't hear about it again. Both of those players had revision. I think Julio Jones's most recent revision was probably 5 years ago. Emmanuel Sanders was way back in Pittsburgh once upon a time. And those are players that are 30 and above that are doing just fine. And there's a long list of wide receivers that fall into that category. So, the hope is that some of these players that were, Brian Edwards had one recently, coming into the league. There's going to be lots of players that we're going to watch and see. Some of those players are likely going to need revision surgeries, but generally you should feel better about those players when they've had a full off season to recover.
And now we go to the second half of the show. Not that I may be asking you something about an injury or two. Again, Dr. Gene. First, Matt, just to go back to the Salene's question about rookie quarterbacks. Do you have, with rookie quarterbacks, first-round quarterbacks, and obviously Jordan Love isn't going to be rushed onto the field. Joe Burrow is going to start week 1. But we still have this question, when are we going to see Tua? When are we going to see Justin Herbert? Does 2 preseason games change that calculus at all, or anything you want to add to that picture going forward, say, if we have 2 preseason games?
I think it may change it a little bit on an individual basis, depending on how well the players absorb the offense and how they're looking. It may give some false positives or some false, the biggest risk is it gives some false positives, and then those guys fall on their face, kind of the same way that Deshaun Kaiser was a false positive in Cleveland for a couple of quarters in a preseason game late in the year a few years ago. So that's the possibility there. But I think that really, more than anything, all the guys that you mentioned are likely to be playing by mid to late season at the latest. Anyhow, unless Tyrod Taylor or Ryan Fitzpatrick lead the Dolphins and the Chargers respectively to 8-0 starts, and or something to that, that level of an outlier, then I think you're going to see, even if Fitzpatrick is playing reasonably well, I think that you'll see Tua. And I think the same goes with Taylor. I mean, I think Taylor, is basically a placeholder for a month and a half before they bring in Herbert, just the same way as Taylor was for Baker Mayfield. This is a more talented team than what the Browns were at the time that Taylor was quarterbacking for Cleveland. You have a pretty decent offensive line. You have some good skill talent around there, and some real nice pieces on the defense. So this is a team that I think that if they don't get off to a great start with Taylor, and Taylor is a reason that this team is winning a lot of games and doing something that the Chargers rarely ever do, which is like start off great, then they're going to roll with him. If not, they're going to get Herbert in there as fast as possible so that he has that opportunity to grow fast with that team, so that they know by 2021, hopefully things will be closer to normal and he will be ready to roll.
Okay. First of all, in the second half of the show, we have to pop the champagne cork for Gut Check 500. Gut Check 500, because we're going to talk about 501. But that's awesome, because that goes all the way back to what, 2006, 2005? When was Gut Check number one?
I think 2004, 2003, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
That's fantastic.
I appreciate that.
It's cool. It just, it's
we're old.
Well, someone pointed out on Twitter today that when Danny Glover said, I'm too old for this ish, he was 41. So, anyway.
41.
Okay. We're not. I don't think any of us are 41. So we're not too old for fantasy football or football. Gut Check the 501 is from the gut, and I like this because it's just players that you're highlighting and saying, hey. So the first entry is 3 entries actually. Olamide Zacchaeus, slot receiver extraordinaire. I'll co-endorse that as if Hayden Hurst gets hurt, he could be a more refined receiver than Russell Gage from the slot. That's interesting. You bring up Jared Pinkney, along with Hunter Bryant. Interesting guys, somewhat highly regarded at different times in the draft process, but fell out of the draft. The one I'm most interested in is Quadri Olison, not just because he's from Pitt. But, what's interesting here is that, as you point out, they took him in the 5th round. Dirk Cutter likes him. They used him in the red zone last year at the goal line. And Atlanta opens up with Seattle, at Dallas, Chicago, at Green Bay, and Carolina. Now, 4 of those 5 games are against teams that I would think Dirk Cutter's going to want to run against them. Say, let's establish the run, which could be good for Todd Gurley. And Doc, that's where I'm going to bring you in. But you watch the Falcons every week for recaps, Matt. Do you see the Falcons having the kind of running game this year, especially strong out of the gate, that makes Olison a sleeper because of the situation and because of his fit in the running game?
I think it makes him a guy to monitor and see how his camp develops. The Falcons have the stage to be able to give him a chance to perform. It's just a matter of whether Gurley is healthy and whether or not Olison can beat out Brian Hill and or Ito Smith. And I think, the Ito Smith campaign has pretty much ended like some of the other political campaigns we've seen, this year. So I would look at, really, it's between Hill and Olison. And the thing about Olison is that he really knows how to use his power. He knows how to use his power and his weight, and he's also a lot quicker than people realize. I mean, like he's a pretty quick change of direction type of guy with a good burst, and the speed isn't bad. It's sub 4.6 for a guy in the 220, 230 range. I mean, that's not bad for a big guy. So I think it comes down to, can he have a good camp? And if he does, because he had one last year, but the talk was Brian Hill. So everyone was is Brian Hill going to overtake Ito Smith? And then Brian Hill, the final 2 preseason games, dropped some passes, and it was a tight competition with Smith, and Smith ended up retaining the job and then got hurt again. So, now you look at Olison, he was having a good camp as well, but because he was a rookie, much wasn't expected of him. He was a special teams guy, and he made it on the basis of his special teams. Usually, teams when they have a pretty good depth chart, and they had a decent one in Atlanta from a preseason perspective, they thought, they probably didn't pay as much mind to Ollison as someone for 2019. Now for 2020, I think they're going to look at him more as this is someone that we could possibly lean on. So let's give him a deeper look. And if he earns that opportunity, then yes, with Chris Lindstrom, with Caleb McGarry, you have Alex Mack coming for another year. You have a right side of that line that can be very good against the run. And after the Carolina game, that offensive line, even though the yardage may not have been there for the run game for Atlanta, in a dramatic difference, the timeliness of how well they were blocking and not missing blocks and being able to, make good, quality plays was improved from that Carolina game forward for like the final 5 to 6 weeks of the season. So I think that you'll see another step upward for Atlanta's offense, and a lot of that will be the run game. So that's why Ollison gets mentioned.
And it's important because of Todd Gurley. I mean, it was more important because of Todd Gurley, Dr. Gene. It's been an odd offseason for many reasons. One of them was that we've seen deals done, but the physicals not happen for weeks or months after the deal is announced, which is really not usually the way the NFL does things. I mean, Ian Rappaport or someone will say they're expected to, or there'll be some language that shows the deal's not final yet, but we just went forward. And some of the deals, and it wasn't always medically related. The Timmy Jernigan deal fell through, and apparently he didn't even have a physical. And that was, again, weeks, months later. But we did hear, Gene, recently, like this week, I think, Todd Gurley passed his physical. Confetti. Yay. Dirk Cutter had said, famously earlier in the offseason, well, we don't even know. When they asked him about Todd Gurley, he basically said, I don't know about his health. That's kind of how we all felt when he was with the Rams. This is a bit of a temperature check. Speaking, you got that in my brain now after the chat room. On Todd Gurley, or what you'll be watching for, because this is fantasy football. And again, Gurley, his knee's going to feel good coming out of the gate, or as good as it's going to against that schedule. He could get a chance to have touchdown, maybe like 7 touchdowns in the first 5 games or something like that, if the knee feels good. What do you have to add?
Nothing. There's nothing new on Todd Gurley. He has a degenerative knee condition. It's arthritic. It is going to flare up on him from time to time. He may go a full season with having very little issues as far as swelling and pain and limited range of motion and limited activity level, or he may struggle by taking a funny step or getting hit on the knee whenever contact happens. First week of training camp, first couple of weeks of the regular season, what have you. I think the pertinent question about Gurley this year is the same as the pertinent question about Gurley last year, which is, how does his team plan to use him? How long will he hold up in that role? And what do we see? There were times last year where he looked not that much unlike the player that he was previously, but the Rams weren't going to use him in that way. The Falcons may decide, we're just going to ride him. And if it lasts 2 weeks, great. If it lasts 17 weeks, even better. But until we know what to expect, that's kind of where it's going to be. I don't think the Falcons would have signed Gurley if they didn't think they were going to be able to pass him on a physical. And there isn't anything that magically happened to Todd Gurley's knee this offseason that made him more likely to pass a physical. He didn't spontaneously generate cartilage in his knee to
he
limit
didn't go
motion
to
going on
Evander
over the
Holyfield's church.
Wouldn't it be nice? So, no, I mean,
Wouldn't it
I don't really feel like that's the fact that the Falcons decided to sign him tells you that they saw enough on his tape and what they know of him already last year during the regular season that, they were willing to take the risk that something wasn't going to happen this offseason before they could see him in his own training that would make him, it was more or less a formality that he was going to pass his physical, but they definitely wanted to take a look at him before finalizing things as we get closer to training camp to say, yes, you're in condition. There's nothing here that we didn't expect to see on your exam. We know what we have in you. And now the rest of the offseason can be the coaching staff deciding how they want to incorporate him into the offense.
Okay, let's get back to the gut. And checking back in, and there's some really, folks, again, check this out right now, as long as you're on our email list. Everything is free at footballguys.com. And there's some good names. The name Jacques Patrick, which is, just anytime I first learn a name from Matt Waldman, it makes me want to dig deeper. But I really wanted to ask you about Hakeem Butler, because this is that time. I mean, look, let's be realistic about the mass psychology in fantasy football right now. A lot of people, rookie drafts were a rush. Dealing with our teams, I think there were trades maybe not even related to rookie picks. And now we're going to have a lull again until training camp. So people are going to be fiddling with their teams. So this is the time to get your buy low offers in on Hakeem Butler, Matt Waldman. Is that a strategy you endorse? And how do you feel about him a year later?
Yeah, it's a strategy I endorse, and I've done it in our IDP Dynasty League. I actually bought him low from Daniel Simpkins and during our draft. And the reason being is that, a lot of times when you have a player that's rated highly, and so, when you look at Butler, I had him rated very high. There were people who in the industry, some that had him rated very high. And then he wound up being a 4th round pick. And so that's something that, when they hear that, then that causes, the herd to freak out a little bit, because they're like, well, he must not be that good. If you had him rated so high, how could the NFL not? Well, you could look at it in reverse and say, I've had DeMarco Murray rated very high, and he was a 3rd or 4th round pick that the Dallas Cowboys said we had a 1st round grade on him. And he turned out to be pretty good, a Pro Bowl caliber back in his prime. So you look at that, and sometimes that there's just a difference of opinion about a player and also how you project that growth. And with Butler, the issue was, some drops on his record in terms of drop passes, but were they Sammy Coates types of ball tracking drops, or were they more technique oriented issues that worked in combination to maybe him being a little raw with releases on quick hitting passes, or different type of positioning that he could develop at the catch point where he didn't have to overthink things? Because when you watch his tape, the best catches he makes are up there with some of the best catches you'll see. What he does after the catch is as good as some of the best players you'll see after the catch as a wide receiver. I mean, he's a big, powerful, strong guy who can go up and win the football. And, he didn't distinguish himself extremely a lot in camp. But here's the thing. Again, most people who are observing camp are watching it in real time. That's difficult to do, and be able to pay attention to everyone and actually judge what a practice is. And they're doing it on a deadline, so they're not going to go back and watch the camp tape if they had access to it to say, well, actually, he had a pretty good practice, even though 20 guys, 20 beat writers saw him drop one pass and decide that he didn't have a good practice. So, to me, it's kind of like A.J. Brown, who had really good practices last year early on in the spring, then was pretty much kind of banged up throughout the summer and really didn't play much. And people kind of wrote off the idea that he wasn't going to do much last year, and turned out to be the top rookie receiver in this class. So when you look at Hakeem Butler, before he could really start to get some real-time playing experience, and he would have gotten that if, with Keyshawn Johnson basically in the lineup at times, and the way that they spread the field, having 4 and 5 receivers, you would have thought that it's an easy assumption that Butler would have gotten some opportunities if he didn't hurt himself. And, the other thing is they didn't draft a wide receiver. They did add, DeAndre Hopkins, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. But when you look at this offense, they like to spread the ball around. This is and when you look at, Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk, they had about 700, 800 yards receiving last year. And there were still about 1,000, almost 1,100 yards on the wide receiver depth chart that was attained last year among everybody else. Well, I would argue that DeAndre Hopkins is going to get close to that 1,100 yards. Fitzgerald and Kirk aren't going to get much more than that. Maybe they get a couple hundred yards more apiece if they do. And that would raise, that would give you a minor bump for Kyler Murray at that stage. But I think the guy that stands to really benefit the most is the one who's going to get to play that kind of Kenny Golladay role, being spread out, not having to face a lot of press man, and be able to use his size and speed and strength to actually win mismatches, because everyone's going to be concerned about, those other 3 receivers. And to me, that it's not Andy Isabella who's like the the grand mismatch with just his speed, because still you know, with Isabella, you may be able to win with him because he's going to run past people. But Butler can do that. And on top of that, if you aren't accurate, Butler can go up and basically win above the rim and box out people on a bad pass that Andy Isabella can't do as well. So for me, this is just one of those situations. You know, Fitzgerald is leaving. There's a very good possibility that Butler could be the big slot receiver in a spread offense, in the same way that Galladay has kind of been that way for the Detroit Lions in an offense that isn't always so spread out, but you know, has benefited greatly from the fact that he could be used and moved around for those mismatches. So I think at the very least, we're looking at a guy who within, if it's not this year, by next year, I think he can be a 600 to 800 yard receiver at worst. And I think at best, we're looking at a 1,000 yard, 1,100 yard guy who could give you double digit touchdowns within the next 3 to 4 years when it comes to his high.
And I'm going to go back and put a bunch of offers out as we talk about this, because I'm remembering what I liked so much about Hakeem Butler as you describe him, which is just that rare confluence of the wiry build, play strength, and explosion, including acceleration and a second gear, maybe not a fifth gear, but you don't need a fifth gear. And that's Randy Moss territory at that point. And he's going to get opportunities. But you brought up Kenny Galladay and Jeff Risdon. And Jeff Risdon's like on my short list of people that if he says something that he watched a game and this was his impression, then I just take it as like, well, that's accurate, whatever he said. And he's going back and rewatching the Lions season, and he's commenting on how Kenny Galladay just is having so much trouble separating, while Marvin Jones, number 11, is the guy that Stafford looks to when he knows he needs a catch. And what you bring up is, okay, even if Butler does have some sort of fatal flaw there versus press coverage or separation or whatever, Kenny Galladay is going to be drafted in the top 10 wide receivers in drafts this year. So I think that Hakeem Butler can still be okay. So I like it. I like it a lot. Okay, Gene, I don't know if you heard, but a representative of Dalvin Cook this week said that he's not going to participate in any team activities until he gets a reasonable deal. Now, Courtney Cronin, ESPN, said that the Vikings' first offer was under $10 million, which they didn't think was reasonable. That $16 million, what McCaffrey got, might have been the landmark that Cook's camp was looking for, but they were coming in maybe something more like $15 million. They've come down. But in the article also said that his camp would gladly accept, they use the word gladly, $13 million a year, which was David Johnson's number. And that was a number from like 2 years ago, right? So, you know, but if they called you, Gene, and said, Dalvin Cook, okay, what do we got? We got a torn ACL. We got this, you know, collarbone shoulder thing last year. We got, what was it, the year before? Hamstring, I think. Should we even bother giving this guy guaranteed money in light of that? And, you know, of course, that obviously also implicates fantasy questions. We could talk about Dalvin Cook and his injury risk this year if he holds out into the season. But really, I'm just curious if you were consulting on that decision, how would you weigh in?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's going to be hard for a running back to get paid. I think you're just going to have to be a special player. Dalvin Cook may fall into that category with his ability to run the ball and catch the ball as well, but we're going to see fewer and fewer teams pay running backs. It's already happening, especially when you have a viable backup that you've seen play and be effective like Alexander Mattison. I think running backs are just going to have to accept the fact that holding out is not going to be a great option for them at all. They're going to need to get paid every single year they can. And if that means accepting a little bit less than they ordinarily would, maybe we've seen peak value already with Ezekiel Elliott and Christian McCaffrey. I just don't know that we're going to, you know, like a quarterback or a wide receiver, continue to see those salaries go up and up and up with each successive year, unless you're a really, really special player. So I think I would gladly take is a good way of putting that for Cook. So that's probably where we're going to be.
Here's my take real quickly, because I think I said the running backs should have their own union like 7 or 8 or 9 years ago when you saw this coming. It's just a very simple compromise. It's too late because of the new CBA. It's just running backs become restricted free agents after year 2 of their rookie deal and unrestricted after year 3, no matter where they're drafted. Even if they're drafted in the first round, no 5th-year option. Something, anything. But we'll see, because we got the Alvin Kamara situation and Joe Mixon, and that's why you need to know the name Jacques Patrick. And I just love it, man. I mean, Matt, how many times does this happen where players watch your analysis of their game and then reach out to you and say, I want to get to know you?
It's been nice. It has. I mean, it's happened a few times, so that's been pretty cool. With Jacques Patrick, I mean, what's interesting about him is that he was a high-end prospect out of FSU, and then Cam Akers came along, and Jacques Patrick was kind of sandwiched between like guys like Carlos Williams and Cam Akers, and Dalvin Cook, Dalvin Cook ahead of him. So he was supposed to be the next and never really didn't quite have that speed. And then he was kind of used as a hybrid running back, fullback type of player. But when you really watch his tape, what stands out is that he has excellent footwork and short area quickness, and he can really catch the ball. And he also plays to his size, which is, that 220, 230 pound range. And he didn't get drafted. He didn't even get signed as a UDFA, he wasn't, and last year. So he's technically a rookie this year in most fantasy formats, which is kind of interesting in itself. But he got a tryout with the Browns, and of course the Browns had a full depth chart and were expecting Kareem Hunt back. So he really didn't even make the team there. And so he ended up in the XFL, and he had a strong XFL season for the first handful of games that they actually played. And then when the season was cut short due to COVID, the Bengals signed him. And now that you look at this, and they have, obviously we'll see what happens with Joe Mixon and his contract negotiation. So if that doesn't work out, then you're looking at the combo of likely Rodney Anderson and Giovanni Bernard. Bernard's a nice veteran. Probably if he were in New England with Tom Brady in the past, or in Tampa with Tom Brady now, he'd probably be a much more coveted fantasy option. We'll see what he is and how the way he's been used lately. Probably not the case. He'll be sneaky good if you get him really late. Maybe he'll be able to help you, and if certain circumstances, arise. But most likely, you're looking for who's going to be that lead back. And Rodney Anderson is super talented, but can't stay healthy, and he's been hurt pretty much every season of his career in college, and it's been something, due to either a broken leg. Now it's an ACL tear. I think it's a second tear that he's had. So Travion Williams, Devwa Whaley, neither of those guys I think are special backs, and I think that means that Jacques Patrick has an angle to be able to compete if this Joe Mixon negotiation goes south.
Yeah, well, and what I love is when I brought up the Mixon holdout possibility to you like a month ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. You said, well, yeah. And what's funny is Mixon, we're still waiting. But if the Dalvin Cook data point is any indication, the Saints will probably just pay Alvin Kamara, just like they did with Michael Thomas. I'm not as worried about that. But Mixon and the Bengals, so yeah, you want to know everybody on the depth chart, especially with Rodney Anderson. Real quick, Gene, anything to say about Rodney Anderson except,
You said it better than I did. Sorry. We're having all kinds of good COVID discussions down in the chat room here that I'm trying to keep up with. So, hopefully he's able to recover. Just reading Matt's RSP on him and hearing the Bengals coaching staff rave about him in the brief time that he was healthy and recovering from his ACL last year, you'd love to see him come back healthy and be able to produce and be a viable backup to Joe Mixon. It'd be awesome.
Yeah. Oh, no, he's a fantastic player. It's never been the question. And yes, for those of you that are here live or go back and watch it on YouTube, Dr. Gene is weighing in on just layers, Gene. And the other thing is uncertainty. And I think that you're right to bring up in the chat room the possibility that we still may end up with a season, but with nobody in the stands. Like nobody in the stands, except maybe in Florida. I don't know, like somewhere, like maybe it'll be state by state, but the NFL probably won't allow that because then owners are going to cry foul because you'd mentioned like if you think case numbers might be going up by September, they're already going up in 21 states. And the nature of this has been uncertainty with a capital U.
Yeah.
So even to talk about anything,
The only thing we
September,
know with certainty is that this is going to continue to evolve. We're going
Right.
to continue to learn, and hopefully the lessons we've learned over the last 3 months are things that we can apply in a smart and specific way to whatever we end up facing between, frankly, now, but probably as we get closer to the end of July and August, and as we go through the fall and winter. This is, COVID is going to be with us until some significant percentage of the population gains immunity to it, whatever that looks like, whether it's months and months and years of a slow burn where we all come in contact with it and eventually have enough immunity where it starts to slow down a little bit over time, more than that period, or hopefully we end up with a vaccine sooner than later. That's not going to happen quickly to where we can reach immunity without people getting sick. Or I don't see this as a likelihood necessarily right now, but maybe there is something that we as outpatient providers can do that when folks get sick, it is reliable, does not have significant side effects, and relatively cost effective, that if we can identify you having COVID, give you a treatment, and make your chances of a severe outcome, hospitalization, ICU, mortality otherwise, so minimal that we don't have to worry about any segment of our population being at super high risk of those complications if they get ill. I think that's the least likely, unfortunately, given what we know of viral infections over time of those three categories. And I'm hoping that we have so many highly motivated, highly intelligent minds working on the vaccine question right now that we find some way to get ahead of this before we have the infection run through 60 to 70% of the population. It's just really not, that is not a good option.
No.
So
No.
like I said, but have we, and I wasn't, at the time, I wasn't, March and April, I wasn't here talking about this, but again, whatever we would have said then, had you gone back and listened to something that I may have said at the end of March or early April or even in February, those things would evolve. And hopefully there's enough flexibility and understanding and leeway given to folks that are studying this where, we don't throw the entire situation out with the bathwater, so to speak, because something that was said a month ago or 2 weeks ago needs to be revised and improved upon. See that for the progress it is, rather than that none of it is trustworthy, the discussion to begin with. So it's an evolving situation. And wrap your minds around the fact that the NFL is going to be confronting COVID-19 through February, no matter what it looks like in some form or fashion. This is not going to be a smooth training camp to Super Bowl situation.
No, but I appreciate, I pray for you and all the other healthcare professionals. I think they said over 600 frontline healthcare professionals have died from COVID now, because I see it on your shoulders, almost literally, Gene. And I know you carried this on your shoulders before COVID, of your community and your patients and their health. And healthcare professionals, even though other people who maybe should be doing things to help us manage the situation aren't, healthcare professionals are. And that's probably going to be, the last safety net that maybe, hopefully, someone listening now, or the three of us, don't end up having to rely on it. But a lot of people in our country are. And again, I'll say, and I like our audience, and I think that this might be a message that falls on people that are nodding and agreeing. Wear your mask. 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 Wear it when you're
Read
out.
books on how to be an introvert. I've been spending 40 years having to look at damn bookshelves about how to be an extrovert. It's about time you need to learn how to be an introvert. It's not that hard. It's okay.
It's wearing a mask lowers transmission. And if everybody wears mask, also, I think, I can't remember the name of it, someone was talking about, I bring this up. If you wear a mask out in public, it's a signal to people, virtue signal, I don't know. It's a signal that you're taking this seriously. And I think if enough people wear masks, it can hit a tipping point. And then a lot of people, there was the case in Missouri of the hairdresser who went and had like 140 clients, and there was no transmission to any of the clients because they were all wearing masks and the hairdresser was wearing a mask. So
All right,
wear
I
a
want to make
mask.
I want to
Go
make
ahead.
2 quick points here before
Yeah.
the YouTube overlords kill us.
Yeah,
and I'll be brief about this. I do think it is reasonable to wear a mask to protect others. It is important for folks to understand that it is not foolproof, but
No.
every little bit of thing that you can do to limit your exposure and your potential risk of exposing others is a reasonable thing to do. And I understand that it's difficult for some folks to wear masks for lots of different reasons, but it is a reasonable thing to do. It is not fake news to suggest that a mask can be helpful. The other thing is I know Matt is joking about the introvert situation there. And I do think it's important to come to terms with the fact that it's important to limit your risk by staying home when you can. But I think we did a disservice to many, many folks by calling this social distancing, because the isolation and the behavioral health costs of this are still significant. So, yes, it is important for you to try to be comfortable when you can with staying at home, but don't think of this as social isolation. Don't think of it as isolation at all. Think of it as physical distancing. Get out of your houses, get some fresh air. Try not to do it where lots of folks are congregating, but this is not a situation where you have to stay in your home and learn to be socially isolated. That's the opposite of what we can do. So those of you who are on the extroverted side, reach out to your introverted folks or just check in with people from time to time so that we're not socially isolated. There are ways to make yourselves more comfortable about being at home and not being able to spend time in person with those you love. But there are other ways that we can reach out to each other and make this less socially isolating than it may have been because of winter weather, because we didn't really understand maybe at the time just the extent of how important, where, and when physical distancing needed to take place. But don't think of it as social distancing. That's not something that really, it's not really a thing. Think of it as physical distancing.
Yeah, and just take care. Be aware. Pay attention to what's going on in your county. Pay attention. Talk. Stay in touch with people. Monitor your health. Monitor the health of people around you. Check, like Gene said, check in on each other. This is a crucial time. The numbers are starting to go up significantly. If you're in Texas, if you're in Arizona, if you're in California, these are places that, again, I think we need more finely granulated data. So watch. I know Travis County, where I moved from a couple of years ago, is starting to see an alarming rise. I say all this stuff because I'm taught. You're listening to me right now. You're listening to us, and we want to have a positive effect on your life and the people around you. So this is a really important time. Unlike March, we're not going to pull the emergency brake. We're all kind of on our own now to assess our own risk, to educate ourselves, and the better we do for ourselves, the better we'll do for each other. So thank you, everybody. Always for coming out an hour later. Dr. Gene, Matt Waldman. One of these days, we'll get Cecil Lammey back. And we appreciate you all so very much. Again, Football Guys early bird discount. I don't know the exact date, but I know that you can still get the early bird discount. So if you want to support Football Guys, you like what we do, this is a good time to do that. Of course, your Matt Waldman RSP. You already have that. So thank you again, everybody. Dynasty players, make sure you check out on Tuesday nights Jordan McNamara and Chad Parsons. Good stuff there. And sports coming back, life coming back. But again, be careful, everybody. We love you, and